very much. I think I'm going to start with a lot of thanks. Thanks to the Center for Fiction, Mrs. Noreen Tomasi, the Executive Director, Mrs. Christine Henley, the Program Director. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Thank you to the Dalkey Archive Press. Thank you to its director, John O'Brien, and to the senior editor who is with us tonight, Jeremy Davis. Thank you very much. And of course, I will thank our translator after. Our translator being the most important person tonight. This is very moving because you have the book here behind me. This is very moving because it's when one is passionate about literature, like I know that many of you or all of you must be. This is a special thing to see a literary work being translated and being offered to a much bigger audience. And to see the finished product, this is something really extraordinary. And in Switzerland, we are extremely proud about this Swiss series that we are doing in partnership with Petrarca-Preis and the Swiss Foundation for Culture, for Helvetia, who is in charge at federal level in Switzerland, in charge of promoting Swiss literature at home and abroad. For them it's an extremely important project and they are extremely proud of this series. We are launching tonight the first book. When you talk about Swiss literature, you have to consider several languages to translate from, otherwise this wouldn't be a Swiss literature series, this would be something else, a language translation, but to make something Swiss you have to consider all languages. Our writers, we have several cultural worlds, and our writers write in German, or they write in French, or they write in Italian, or they write in Romansh or other languages, because, or we have, yes, so this is, you will check out the series and you will see that we will have several different writers. So thank you very much for making this possible. Mr. Burton-Pike will tell us about the book and we will hear a reading. I just would like to say a few words about the writer, just on a personal note. So the writer Gerhard Meier was born in 1917 in northern Switzerland. You have to imagine south of the Jura mountain slopes. And it's a small town called Niederbipp in the Canton of Bern. This almost sounds like a joke, but it's not. And Meier chose to live his whole life there. Although he traveled in Europe and with his wife, they went to Russia, and but still he chose to stay there, live there. So there you have a true writer in love with the grande littérature, the way the French perceive it, the way the French define it, you know, Tolstoy, Proust, Fernando Pessoa. He's in love with this literature, and that's his obsession, you know, to write, and he's in love with these great universal ideas. He was also worshipping Nietzsche and other philosophers, and exactly because of all this, he chooses to live happily a very provincial and subdued life. So there is there a contrast between the universal and the tiny daily human life, which is also typical from great brains with talent, and that's where we see his greatness. Let me just describe a day in Meier's routine. He's over 40. He has decided to stop working in the factory in order to exclusively dedicate his time to writing and to literature. And this is a decision that has been taken together with his wife, his beloved wife, how is she called? Dorli Meyer-Vogel, the little bird. And so his wife is starting to work in order to support the family and the children. And they live in Niederbipp, a townhouse, just normal townhouse, but with a beautiful garden. They attend to the garden themselves. So this is a routine that he's going to do all his life. He wakes up early, he makes the coffee, he sits in the garden with the coffee cup. Independently of the season, rain or shine, he will sit outside in the garden. He reads a couple of pages from Proust, À la recherche du temps perdu. He has been doing so for decades, reading Proust. Then he drinks more coffee. Then he reads a few lines of Fernando Pessoa, Das sehr gut, das Buch der Unruhe. I will have to ask for the translation in English. It's beautiful. Then goes to his desk and starts writing. He writes from 9 to 12, he has lunch, goes back to writing, writes from 2 to 5. He has on his desk a postcard depicting Tolstoy for inspiration and a non-functional clock. This must be some Swiss obsession, showing eternally the time of 5 to 5. He says that when he was working at the factory, this was always at the end of the day, the glückliche Moment, the moment of happiness, the happy moment, because the work would be finished at 5 o'clock. So from at 5 to 5, he kept it there. And this discipline in the factory has, of course, deeply influenced also his daily routine. Then he goes out for a walk from Niederbipp to Am Rhein every day and back. And every day the same routine and discipline. So I thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to give the word to Jeremy, who will then introduce Burton Pike. And thank you so much for bringing this beautiful text over to us in English. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy Davies. I'm a senior editor at Petrarca-Preis. I'm going to assume people here, for the most part, know what we do. If not, you can talk to me afterwards. So I don't want to hold things up very much, but first of all, I'd like to thank the Arts Council of Provincia for making this series possible. And of course, the Swiss Consulate for also contributing to making this possible, and the Center for Fiction for hosting us. Can you hear me? Is this the pointed? There we go. So obviously every book we publish is wonderful, but even among our wonderful books, there are certain ones that have become personally wonderful books that I'm very proud to have worked on, and this is one of them. It's one of my favorite books from the last few seasons. We would never have discovered it if not for Provincia and the collaboration with the various Swiss foundations, and not least because it was just such a joy to work with Burton on it, and the translations came out so beautifully. So I'm very proud to have been even tangentially involved with Burton getting out into English. So I will introduce Burton. Burton Pike is Professor Emeritus of Comparative Literature and German at CUNY. He co-translated Musil's The Man Without Qualities and has translated Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, and Rilke's novel for us, The Notebook of Multilords Brig. His translations have appeared in numerous periodicals, and here's Burton Pike.
Well, thank you all for all of the nice words and about this strange writer. There is no getting around it, although he was certainly wonderful. I would just like to introduce the book, first of all, very briefly, and then to read some excerpts and either intersperse them or afterwards give you a few excerpts from a book of interviews that he did with a Swiss journalist, which I translated for Donkey for their house organ. and which gives you some kind of insight into what Consul Sharp was saying about the kind of life he led and why he led it that way. So Gerhard's novel, Isle of the Dead, was published in 1979. It is the first volume of a tetralogy whose other volumes were published in 1982, 1985, and 1990. And Meier died in 2008 at the age of 91. Two elderly friends, Bauer and Binschedler, are strolling through the Swiss city of Olten on November 11th, 1977, St. Martin's Day. Bauer, who does most of the talking, is reminiscing to his friend about his childhood in the small town of Amray, his family, and incidents from his life. Binschedler replies sparsely and obliquely, or simply records his thoughts and observations. Isle of the Dead is, of course, the title of Arnold Böcklin's famous painting. The tone of this novel is elegiac, and its setting is autumnal. The dead and the past are brought to vibrant life in Bauer's talking. Early November is the time of year for remembering the dead, and the novel is perfused with a sense of the transience of human life. It is a celebration of life, warm, witty, and regretful, quite different from the sense of alienation we are used to in so much modern fiction. The book is deeply autobiographical. It tells a story but has no plot. Think of Thornton Wilder's Our Town, or Santayana's The Last Puritan, which Santayana called a memoir in the form of the novel. This is that kind of story. Flannery O'Connor wrote that it is the business of fiction to embody mystery through manners, and mystery is a great embarrassment to the modern mind. The mystery is the mystery of our position on earth, and the manners are those conventions which, in the hands of the artist, reveal that central mystery. Meier has, with mesmerizing skill, transferred his own life and thought into his two characters, Bauer and Binschedler. Walking through an impersonal present, these characters revivify a rich past through the act of remembering, an act that is enfolded by mystery. As you will hear, Meier achieves this effect through a winding progression of spiraling sentences and ballad-like refrains, in the disconnected way that one remembers past things. So let me read you some excerpts. The tires of an automobile screeched. A car backing up stopped. The driver of the screeching car twisted his left index finger on his left temple. There was a smell of gasoline. Why, Binschedler, when one is old, does one have this crazy need to look backwards or to live with our yesterdays, or to grasp again and again the threads that bind one with what has passed away, vanished, is irretrievable, that must somewhere have dissolved and yet is present, not to be got rid of, that is then somehow laid with us in the earth, where it dissolves, or would have to pass along into the mineral, the material, in order to become present above us in flowers, lilies, for example, asters, snowdrops, forget-me-nots, as their aroma, insofar as they are pleased to dispense such, Bauer said. Through the nearly bare trees, one could observe the quietly flowing Ara, its colorations, which it had taken from the colorations of its banks, but also from those of the sky. Are the plastic flowers, Bauer said, the plastic flowers that appear increasingly on our graves, a sign that we increasingly take less and less with us into our graves, less and less of what has passed away, vanished, is irretrievable, that then passes into the lilies over us, into the forget-me-nots, the snowdrops, and that streams out as their fragrance, insofar as they are pleased to dispense such. Upon which this aroma can in turn produce in those left behind this crazy need to look backward or to live with our yesterdays. So it can just keep going around and around, Binschedler. Concerning which, The plastic flowers can, of course, have something quite special about them, something almost able to signal a new epoch, an epoch attempting to enter into competition with nature in a painfully awkward way, and in which these competing products, the plastic lilies, for example, derisively outlast the genuine products, the ordinary lilies, for example, many times over. Bauer reached out for a chestnut. So that something painful attaches to the plastic flowers in that they exhibit the awkwardly moving quality that characterizes shoddy things, especially plastic bouquets. Bauer said, stroking at the same time with the back of his left hand over the poster, Patria, your security, 99 years Patria, for all your insurance protection, on a wall of posters on the Wilsterstrasse. Bauer. As I was getting ready to go get some bread, I heard in the kitchen the buzzing of a blowfly, somewhat more indistinct than usual, but irritating enough. I went after the blowfly, opened the door, turned on the porch light. Involuntarily, I had to think of Damaso Alonso's blowfly, about which I had written Ammenshauser the day before, that Alonso had killed it so he could finish a poem, which then moved him to write a poem about the death of a blowfly. For Ammenshauser had written me about a fly, a longish, transparent, light green fly with gold button eyes and coiled antennae that was just then drinking in front of him, hovering, and that comes into the room in autumn and stays the whole winter, but becomes so weak that he does not believe it could still have a spring. So the blowfly flies onto the porch benchada against a window, begins to wriggle. A spider comes, a little one, from the upper window frame. Spider and fly have at each other, violently, briefly. The spider withdraws, not before having wrapped up the fly. The blowfly wriggles as well as it can. Light mixes in, the clouds, the leaves. The blowfly gets more and more tangled up, works free, drops a few centimeters, remains dangling. The spider is there, wraps up the blowfly, disappears back above. Leaves dance on the ground, in the air, vibrate on twigs. On the hillside, cherry trees gleam, further down, pear trees. Here and there, the hillside is greening. The blowfly wriggles and works free, flies to the next window, hangs there. A spider, a bigger one this time, wriggle, rig, the spider retreats, comes closer to the blowfly from below, from behind, bites. The blowfly twitches. The twitching ebbs. The spider withdraws. The fly is dangling dead in the room. Cones of light fall now on this, now on that part of the staffage. 3, 4, 5 pear trees sparkle, phosphorize, then some plum trees, a cherry tree. Clouds come up over the Jura Mountains, parallel to them on the west wind. Rail cars coupled far off. On the river the gulls floated past. A gust of wind brought exhaust fumes. We walked on. We were cleaning up the borders, Bauer said, because we wanted to put down composted soil. The trees, at least those that still had leaves, most of their leaves, stood there like torches. Above all, of course, the cherry and the pear trees. It was almost evening. At times, the leaves of the cherry trees vibrated as if on command, only to expire as one into a kind of immobility. And you know, Benchela, I am a visual person. The trunks and branches of the cherry trees, especially the trunks, were black, making the cherry trees seem like torches on black posts, occasionally flown over or even swarmed around by crows. Although to point out that crows' blackness here would be unnecessarily specific, for crows simply are black. But when they, the crows, appear too often and in unusual numbers, I feel somewhat uneasy, because crows seem at times to be accompanied by imminent misfortune, which of course almost borders on superstition, crows and misfortune. So when my wife and I were recently working in the garden and heard voices from the east side of the house, one still had something like Chopin etudes in one's head, for that odd behavior of the leaves evoked piano music, and why not then music of Chopin? for it seems really saturated with Polish Galician autumns, with tortures on black posts, whose wraps, who knows for what reason, tremble at times, only to again motionlessly enclose a light around which crows are swarming. A light plane circled over the town, came in for landing on a small airfield nearby. The house fronts on the opposite riverbank appeared classical or bore traits of Art Nouveau, or the simple ones of our day. Binshedle, then the three women with winter asters. These turned out to have been his sisters. And needless to say, Meier had three sisters. The degree of accuracy to life is absolutely incredible in this novel. Everything in it is true to life. That is, to Meier's own life. Anyway, these three women finally got up to leave. That is, it occurred to Johanna to mention that she had recently been to see Philip, who is brother of them all. Things were going well with him. They went to eat together in the usual place. You eat well and cheaply there. Philip drank just one beer with his meal. And the restaurant people were extremely friendly, especially the proprietor, who even came over to the table to shake hands. Philip then tried to let her know, to the extent that he could still make himself understood. We only find out later that he lost his larynx. To the extent that he could still make himself understood what was behind this friendliness. The fight had broken out in the pub, and some ruffian had landed one on the proprietor. He, Philip, had stood up, gone up to this ruffian, planted a hook to his chin, and gone back to his place. The man was carried outside. In November, Binshedle, there are more magpies too. Perhaps one just sees them better in November. November is the most intense month, Binshedle, at least for colors, movement, light, but also for despair, rapture. Occasionally, of course, it seems apathetic this November, wraps itself up as it were in fog, sometimes for days, for weeks, so that the stone crosses in the fields are dripping, the farmsteads dozing sleepily as if people, cattle, fields did not exist, the nut trees did not exist, the martins that push things around in attics at night banking about as if the farmsteads were haunted. Vexed dogs lie chained up. Roads squeeze around the farms, ending in gravel ditches, woods, plains, which are not recognizable as such. Letter carriers in capes deliver bills for light, water, heating oil, Uncle Tom's cabin perhaps, Bauer said, swinging his arms. I said to Bauer that perhaps the soul resembled that little house on the ulica Dąbrowiecka in Warsaw that contains a collection of some 7,000 artworks. There really was such a place. Which Ludwig Zimmerer, the owner, declared a paradisical cage. The constant stream of new pictures compels a constantly new, technically sophisticated, space-saving presentation, so that from behind and below something can still be conjured forth. The intensity of the pictures, to which one cannot do justice by calling them naive, provides a deep and direct insight into the strange inner worlds of one's fellow humans. There is, for example, a work of Joseph Lurke proclaiming the Annunciation in wood, bringing out its theological boldness with simple piety, and Eve with trout in paradise, but by which Lurke did not mean to allude to the old Christian fish symbol for Christ. His intention was rather to illustrate what was paradisical about paradise. If a lion lets itself be stroked, that's nothing, but a trout? Where, since the fall of man, has a trout let itself be stroked? By one of the cherry trees out in the field, my wife, who was picking cherries, suffered a sunstroke. And this cherry tree, on seeing which, as I have mentioned, Ferdinand said he no longer wanted such tall cherry trees, I have before my eyes every day, at least for moments. This is when Meier was sitting in his garden, as we heard. Today, it's merely this, there was such a cherry tree, by the way, in this garden. Today, it's merely the sorry shadow of a cherry tree, occasionally visited by a woodpecker. After stormy nights, Finchadla, stormy nights in November, after those really most terrible stormy nights of the year, during which you are afraid the tiles will start falling from the roof, for when you have an old house of your own, stormy nights are quite different. But one also realizes that they're quite steadfast, all these houses, sturdily resisting the storm. After such stormy nights in November, I sit down in my garden shed, among other things, to look at the cherry tree, the hacked off, the handicapped cherry tree. And then it seems as if it were concentrating on lifting itself to dance on its toes, a child's toe dance. And the lichens on it glow white. And one makes an effort to realize that it's November, that the whole business with winter is yet to come, that all the tiles which have absorbed the summer sun, even the Indian summer sun, will soon be receiving snow and ice, Bauer said, reaching for his cap. Bauer looked at me. When the heart valves seize up, I said to myself, the suddenly stopped bloodstream suffers a reversal, the waves of which spread out to the wall of the heart, and from there to the wall of the chest. Finchadla, I thought a whole life long of writing. Without wanting to torture you now with my views on literature, I still must say that for me, a novel can be compared to a carpet, a hand-woven carpet, in creating which special attention is paid to the colors and motifs which repeat themselves, varied of course, handmade, marked almost by a certain ponderousness, and which reminds one of a girl from school days and a field of flowers with cherry trees in it that are just blossoming. One would like to be walking across this field of flowers at least once more, and of course not alone, Bauer said. We arrived at the Schöngrundstrasse. On its northwest side are two Art Nouveau houses, about which we began to talk. I said to Bauer that in the summer of 1935, Count Harry Kessler noted in his diary on the Rambla de San Jose in Barcelona, with its celebrated flower stalls, that trees, flowers, all plants were the only earthly things that are blessed, whose natural state is what we call heavenly bliss. Plants were altogether far more perfect beings seen from the divine perspective than people. They experienced no fall of man, are and remain without sin, apparently without pain as well. Today one believes to have discovered that plants do experience pain, even anxiety. There is a profound truth in paradise being represented as a garden, as a place whose life is plant life, and where man as such is and remains a stranger. The fall of man, the expulsion of man from paradise, signifies his irretrievable separation from the perfect, divine, vegetative life. This diary entry is a late echo, but once again the authentic voice of the generation around 1900. How in plant life sharp individuation has been done away with unique forms appearing only in transition, the clear line dissolved in favor of the welling up, the wildly proliferating, the intertwining. Thus the external appearance of Art Nouveau exhibits no unambiguous features. Art Nouveau is the expression of a conscious turning away from the decadent feeling of the fin de siècle, a turning away from the signs of decay in society and art, proclaiming the comprehensive renewal of life, but on the other hand remaining prisoner of the heritage it was trying to overcome, and sharing important features with it. In the department store cafe, I went to the coat rack, put on my coat. Bauer clapped on his cap, after having likewise wiped his mouth with his napkin. We went downstairs. On the second floor, made our way through the artificial flowers, paid attention to the iris, reflexively smelled the lilacs, ran our fingers through the forsythia blossoms, counted the colors of the tulips, recoiled from the sunflowers standing palely yellow in a pot on the floor. One positioned oneself on the escalator, walked past the counter with ear, neck, and finger accessories, watches too, past the counter with soap, toothpaste, hand and hair creams, Perfume whose scents are imitations of hyacinths, for example, myrrh, lavender, the scents of lilies, violets, thyme, even of jasmine. Perfumes whose scents were designed to mask the odors of the body. Looked at the salesgirl behind the cosmetics counter and past the counter of music cassettes, reaching the open air through an acoustic prism. Looking over at Bauer, I realized that he was looking downstream and apparently observing the statue at the head of the bridge, representing a bronze horse with a rider, that is, a bronze man who was just on the point of mounting the horse. And one thought to oneself that the horse really, unlike most other animals, belongs to man, and that there must be a lot of them in heaven, according to a place in the book of Revelation that speaks of an army on white horses. And one thought to oneself further that the horse has shared the fate of people, especially their so-called great destiny, which had usually been accompanied by the sounds of horns and trumpets. And one thought how horses can now and then assume a position of staring into the distance as if they were dreaming, remembering. Whereupon they beat a circle in the air with their tails, push up their rumps, run away, reach down for a clump of grass, lift their heads, in order to dreamingly remember again. Now, sculptures, they frequently look rather awkward, rather big too, these horses of bronze. I thought to myself that years ago I had seen a little girl with a doll, in the middle of the grounds of a school that formed an enormous square surrounding a playing field. The girl was walking along one of the facades. A leaf hopped after her. The girl noticed the leaf, talked to the leaf. The leaf lay there, lay where it was. The girl with the doll trotted on, looked back, talked to the doll. The leaf lifted up, hopped after her, overtook the girl, lay there. The girl caught up to the leaf, passed it, looked back, spoke to it. The leaf took off, rushed toward her, hopped past. The girl with the doll hopped after it, reached the leaf, stepped on it, cradled the doll. On the stone steps, a stone girl was playing the flute. It was on that playing field, incidentally, that I first met Bauer. I thought of swarms of gulls, which in late autumn abandoned now the rivers, now the lakes, briefly, of course, to fall upon freshly plowed fields in the interior, insofar as the countryside beyond the rivers, the lakes, can be so characterized. By the way, any of you who are in Switzerland are rather surprised at the sight of seagulls. There are seagulls in Switzerland, apparently because there's so much water for them. It always gives one a start, however. I thought of the enormous swarms of swallows, which, when the grain is ripening in southern Sweden, fly low over boundless fields of wheat, while the land is filled with light. And one thinks one hears the snapping of beaks, for they are chasing small insects, these swallows, which leads to their always snapping their beaks open and shut. And I thought that it was precisely in Sweden, southern Sweden, that the colors of the flowers, the blue of the cornflower, for example, the white of the potato blossoms, are more intense than they are here with us. Remember that there, in southern Sweden, there is chervil, which here we call giant chervil, and which also grew in the Wild West, above all along railroad embankments, where in those days men shot at buffaloes from trains, while the Indians looked on from an appropriate distance, armed with bows and arrows. Bauer. It was one's first confrontation in person with classical civilization, our vacation on Kos. It was a strange sensation, tracing the ornamentation of the head of a column with one's middle finger. And then there was the light, the Aegean light. We wandered through fields of ruins, looked at mosaic, strolled through the remains of the dwelling of a goddess of love, whose walls were decorated with paintings, encountering hardly a lizard or a cicada, at most a butterfly, which, moreover, seemed to be flying backwards. In classical times, people lived with stone, above all with marble. So the people of those times were, so to speak, children of stone and of light, although they too consumed funeral meals and had to endure headaches. For even in those times, the right to happiness, the right to a headache-free life, was a meager utopia. Have you heard cicadas, Vinchela? Evenings at 8, they suddenly start up with their lunatic chirping on the edge of the fields of ruins and oleander bushes, pines, Persian lilacs, cypresses. It seems as if a trembling goes through the few columns still standing, which had presumably been set upright again. At that moment, we were walking past an Art Nouveau house, upon which I said to Bauer that in spite of its revolutionary manifestos, Art Nouveau did not abandon the artificial paradises of the end of the century. Its consciousness of spring awakening remained shot through with heavy dreams of the past. Its celebration of life remained in a secret, uncanny relation to sympathy with death. Inversely, the fin de siècle showed tendencies that pointed forward. One had to think of the ambiguity of Nietzsche's philosophy, in which Art Nouveau and fin de siècle mingled. For Nietzsche said that he had a finer nose for signs of beginning and decline than any man had ever had. He was the teacher of this par excellence. He knew both. He was both. I said further that Otto Julius Birnbaum said that paradise had been taken away from man, and man gave himself art instead, and that there was no morality in paradise, and that art was reclaimed paradise. Art, here proclaimed as conquest and program, appears in Count Kessler's writing only in the context of our irreparable separation from vegetative life. There is no longer any talk of art. Over time, its will to beauty could not fend off the droning of the industrial age, had not been able to surmount the bitterness and ugliness of mortal existence, had not been able to deify man. Representations of political salvation had usurped the place of belief in the aesthetic transformation of the human race, had also, to be sure, mingled with it. The idea of salvation had run through the 19th century and experienced in the fin de siècle and in Art Nouveau an intensification to the point of obsession. Our time, too, is possessed by the striving for salvation. And this is one of the reasons for the fin de siècle's attraction for our time. I looked at the western sky. The disk had disappeared. The red gold remained. The snow clouds had meanwhile drawn closer. Twilight rose out of the east. In Schiller, at the back of our orchard, we have little daffodils. When they are beginning to bloom, I crouch down, say hello, and wait for a light gust of wind. As boys, Philip and I used to bring back the bulbs of these daffodils from up on the mountain in the Löwen Valley. While we were digging up the bulbs, a voice rang out from a nearby bush, "Stop, or I'll shoot." Without letting go of our booty, we ran home. It later turned out that a hunter had been making fun of us. We planted the daffodils northeast of the cherry tree, at the sight of which brother-in-law Ferdinand said, "I no longer let any of my cherry trees get so tall. I saw them all off on top. I don't want any more tall cherry trees." So as soon as there is a white shimmer at the back of the orchard in the spring, I go there, crouch down, listen. And then I really hear the daffodils ringing out over the landscape, Bauer said, with, at the moment, his left hand in his pants pocket, his right stuffed in his jacket pocket. Picasso is said to have once remarked to Malraux that you had to tear people out of their sleep, shake up the way they identify things from the ground up, had to create unacceptable pictures, make them fume. One must force them to see that they live in a crazy world, a world without security, a world that is not the way they thought it was. The twilight had in the meantime progressed. Vinchela, if I should ever get around to writing, I want to do it Picasso's way. It was now beginning to snow. Thank you.